practitioner. What I mean by that is that according to basic demonology, demons require an invitation, although they sometimes manipulate the person through deception into giving them that invitation. Take a Ouija board, for example. It's just cardboard and paint, but those that decide to use it are essentially asking to be contacted by spirits, and that's all the spirits need, your willingness to be contacted, your free will. So let's look at David's testimony to see if we can get any idea if he's dealing with demons instead of ascended Atlanteans trying to help humanity evolve.
Suddenly, I felt over 1989 that there was a presence in the room whenever I was alone. And it became more and more tangible as 1989 unfolded. It was bizarre, really, because whenever I was in a room alone, like a hotel room or something, there was this presence, you know. And eventually, it got so powerful towards the end of '89 that I was sitting on the side of a bed in a hotel called the Kensington Hilton in London, just down from the BBC headquarters. And I said to this apparently empty room, look, if there's something there, would you please contact me because you'll drive me up the wall.
Let's stop right there for now. Notice how all this began with a desire to be contacted. Also note that David will later go on to basically preach that this is all that must be done for anyone to be contacted.
All we've got to say, and it's very simple, is I accept that I am being guided. I have guides in other frequencies, other dimensions of life, who are here to guide me and help me through this lifetime so that I learn the lessons I decided I wish to learn. Go ahead and guide me. And when you do that, things start happening.
He says on page 139 of Love Changes Everything, quote, every single life form can be a part of this transformation if they say openly, I wish to be guided and work for the light. Notice that he capitalizes the word light. On page 156, he quotes the entities which told him, quote, always ask for protection and guidance. Ask and you shall receive. Seek and you shall find. But then they say, you must make the first move. You need to exercise your free will. They tell him at the end of the book, quote, welcome all beings. If you do this, you're welcoming creation into your life. It is also interesting to note the negative effect that even pictures of Jesus began to have on him. In his book Truth Vibrations, he says this about a visit he made to a church as a tourist. Quote, looking up at a large painting of Christ, the picture suddenly turned black and moved around before my eyes. Only the face of Christ was still. Suddenly, I felt a sensation I can only describe as someone pushing a pneumatic drill into the top of my head. I gripped the pew I was standing beside, and my body vibrated from the top of my head to the base of my spine as something seemed to go through me. He says that months later, he was told that he received a gift of energy from one of the ascended masters of the planetary system at this point. Interesting that revulsion towards Jesus is actually quite observable among these entities. I would even go so far as to say that it's empirically testable in our modern times. I've had a unique opportunity to work with hundreds of cases of sleep paralysis through a website a friend and I started called StopSleepParalysis.org. Sleep paralysis is when one wakes up and can't move, but they are fully awake. It is most often associated with the feeling that there is some evil presence in the room. Over time, during the experiences, the presence can become more manifest in some form and can lead to very terrible cases of torture and even rape. This is attributed to demons in almost every culture in the world except for modern Western cultures like America. A few examples are in Fiji, the experience is interpreted as kana tevoro, or being eaten or possessed by a demon. In the Hmong culture, sleep paralysis is described as an experience called dab swam, or crushing demon. In Malaysia, Africa, Hungary, the Middle East, and everywhere in between, these events are attributed to evil spirits. Western scientists do not have an explanation. They postulate, with no evidence I would add, that it is happening because people are coming out of a dream state and into a waking state, and that their mind is still dreaming even though they have awoken. I suppose the obvious question is, if that were true, why does everyone seem to be having the same dream about an evil presence in the room? It seems that the dreams should be as varied as the dreams normally are among people, but this is not the case. In the cases that I have seen, about 90 to 95% of the people experiencing this have been dabbling in some occult or New Age practice, and they have in some way given their free will over to these entities, who now apparently feel that they have a right to be there. The more a person goes down that road, the more intense the control of these entities gets. Now here is the observable and testable part of this. If a person genuinely calls upon Jesus for help, the experience will immediately stop. Very often, the entities will scream or be thrown back. One of the interesting aspects to this is it doesn't appear that a person has to be a Christian to do this, or to have previously believed that Jesus was important in some way. In fact, as you can guess, many of the people who are getting this are not Christians at all. But most of them who do see this authority that the name of Jesus has over these beings that they've been dealing with for so long, do begin to research who he is and why his name is so important. Now, this doesn't work with other names, interestingly. For instance, calling on Buddha, no matter how sincere the person is, doesn't seem to concern these entities. There would be another time in Icke's life when he would vibrate uncontrollably like he did when looking at that picture of Jesus. This was when he took his infamous trip to Peru. He tells the story this way.
I had this overwhelming feeling, again, the urge, the impulse, to go to Peru. We got to this place, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And basically, when you looked around, it was encircled by mountains, in the distance, mind. And I'm looking out the window, daydreaming, and I see this mound to my right, but must be no more than 3 minutes down the road. And as I look at the mound, all I can hear in my head is, come to me, come to me, come to me, come to me, come to me. And I walk to the center of the circle, and suddenly my feet go again, like they did in the news shot, but only seriously more powerful. They're like magnets pulling my feet to the ground. And I think, oh crikey, I recognize that, here we go. And then I felt like a drill going in the top of my head and through my body, through my feet into the ground, and then another one coming the other way. And then my arms go out at 45 degrees like that. I never made any decision to do it. And what then started to happen is this energy coming through me. This is February 1991. Got more and more powerful. My body started to shake with it. Very powerful thought forms just passed through my head, just like in the news shot. It was like, you know, if you've got a dam and it's holding water back, well, the water is calm, right? Because that's its natural state in that situation, if you like. But when the dam bursts, before a new balance is found after the dam bursts, all hell breaks loose in the water, right, as it's trying to go from one state to another.
Yep.
When I look back, what happened to me on that mound? It was like the waters of my mind bursting.
Icke always attributes this event to this place in Peru being located near a vortex point in something he calls the energy grid. But there is another side to that story. I used to believe in the idea of ley lines myself. I had no reason to doubt it. After all the so-called teachers I had in the truth movement talked about it as if it was a long-established fact. But I encourage anyone to do some research about how this idea started and see if you can still force yourself to believe it after that. There is actually a very interesting history of its evolution, and I will provide links in the notes where you can get all the details on this to get you started with the research. I say this because many people will claim that a proof that a ley line exists is the fact that certain places, especially ancient ritual sites, have a very heavy feeling of energy. I would validate that, but let me offer an alternate theory, one that I think is based on a much more observable cause. Icke would say that the reason that people were sacrificing on these ancient sites is because they were on powerful spots in the energy grid, and these people were adding negativity to it to affect world consciousness, and that's why the place feels negative. But I would say, based on my understanding of satanic rituals, that the areas are not intrinsically special at all. It is simply by it being the place where a lot of blood is spilled in sacrifice that it draws the presence of these evil spirits to the place. And that is why the area feels negative, as a result of their presence. Let me see if my theory helps us to understand what happened to Icke in Peru. But first let me describe a little about the area that he was visiting. The area that Icke was in was known for its blood sacrifice. New human sacrificial sites turn up all the time in Peru from the pre-Incan and Incan civilizations, especially that of small children. In fact, the place that Icke talks about in this clip was a place called Silistani, where there are stone channels that lead down to the lake so that the blood of the sacrifices could flow from the sacrificial site to the lake. Ironically, there is also a lizard engraved at the site too, and they still sacrifice pregnant iguanas there to this day. There is a stone circle on the mound there, which is exactly like the one 3 minutes down the road where Icke says his Kundalini experience was. This area was full of these stone circles on mounds, and I would suggest to you, based on his description of his convulsions and on him hearing voices of beings in his head on a daily basis after this, that he was further controlled by the entities at this point. Then there is the story of his experience in Brazil with the drug ayahuasca.
In 2003, when I had an ayahuasca experience in Brazil, and a voice talked to me for 5 hours about the nature of reality. Real clear, very funny, and mind-blowing and life-changing.
Ayahuasca is a DMT-containing drug, which is naturally produced in the pineal gland, and is present in wild plants found in places like the Amazon basin, and has been used for millennia by Aboriginal shamans and medicine men to contact the spirit world and to receive information from entities there. It is common for adjoining DMT partakers to see the same apparitions. Psychologist Dr. Rick Strassman conducted a formal clinical study of DMT ingestion under the auspices of the University of New Mexico, which he detailed in his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. He found, under controlled clinical conditions, that subjects had these experiences within seconds of ingesting DMT, which almost universally mimicked what are described elsewhere as alien abduction events. Note that these subjects were screened to be those who were not familiar with stories of UFOs or did not believe in them. The entities they encountered were typically described as traditional greys, reptilian, or insect-like. The context usually involved medical and reproductive experiments conducted by the entities on the subjects, described as violent rape episodes. When subjects were willing to try additional experiences, they reported that the entities acknowledged their prior disappearance with no sensation of time loss. The episodes were so traumatic to the subjects that a support group was later formed to help them deal with the emotional trauma of the experiences. I would ask you to remember the quote from Terence McKenna warning us about these entities. He had more experience with this drug than most people, and as much as he enjoyed talking about it, recall that he always described the so-called elves he came into contact with as, quote, mischievous, which is a more sugar-coated version of the descriptions that I have heard from people who have taken it, who simply call these beings evil. And I'm sure not everybody's experience is bad, but here's the question we should ask about these entities that show up when we take drugs like this. Should we assume that the entities that are talking about love are good? Or based on the fact that the negative ones obviously exist and are contacted by the exact same means, can we be skeptical of the positive ones as well? In fact, how do we know that the so-called good ones we encounter aren't simply pretending to be good? Especially, as in Icke's case, if the voice is clearly describing the same doctrine that Alice Bailey's ascended masters have been trying to teach us from the beginning, this idea of spiritual evolution. I think that the biggest problems we have in the truth movement are, one, we have no idea that everything we believe, we were made to believe by people carrying the message of these entities. And two, because we don't really understand what their end game is, or why they are so diligent with this deception, it makes us powerless to defend against it. We don't even know what it is they're trying to ultimately do. We find ourselves wanting to believe what they want us to believe, and we never have realized that we are being led like sheep to the slaughter to what I like to call the New World Order. Let me introduce you to the real plan of the Illuminati. The one thing that has never changed in Icke's teaching is the idea of the coming evolution of humanity.
One of the themes at that time, we're talking 1990, was that there was a consciousness shift coming. I kept meeting psychic people a lot in those days, and they kept saying, I'm getting something, I'm being told to tell you this, and again it was, there's a consciousness shift coming. There is an awakening coming. And now as the 90s have become the new century, more and more this stuff about this shift is going on.
This also happens to be the central thesis to Theosophy, the mother of the New Age movement. In fact, the very term New Age is referring to a coming time of spiritual evolution. This fact alone should show you how the idea of a spiritual evolution is the only idea that matters to these beings. We've already looked at some of the reasons why Icke thinks the idea of a coming spiritual evolution is valid. One is because he believes the photons from the photon belt will change us, and alternatively, he believes that the galactic logos will send its